This is what I want from a memoir. Hello, everybody. I'm author R.L. Raintree. This is Reels and Reads, where I give honest reviews and occasional spoilers. And that little fellow that was behind me when he wasn't supposed to be, that was my cat, Professor Severus Snape. He may or may not make an appearance. Deal with it. I was lucky enough to receive an advanced copy of this audiobook by Sourcebooks. Thank you so much for that. And I have to say I was not prepared for the amount of energy and zest that was used to narrate this audiobook. Frankie Grande, yes, Ariana Grande's brother, narrates his own story. He recounts the highs and lows of his life, and he tells it in a way that is loud and bold and makes you wish you knew him personally. There are certain things that happen in the novel that, because Frankie narrated himself, I was really able to feel the weight of the decisions and the moment, because as theatrical as he is, it's almost as if it's a reenactment to some level. He's very dramatic, very bold. He uses his voice wonderfully, and it just embodies something that you just can't get from reading the words yourself. There's just a vibe that you just can't get unless you hear the audiobook. Frankie used to be on Broadway, so that definitely shows up in this audiobook. He sings, he bursts into song at random, so manage your volume settings. The way he tells it is flamboyant, and I understand that these are cliches when we're talking about the gay community, but I mean them in the traditional sense of the word. He's flamboyant, he's bold, he's dramatic, he's theatrical. It's an experience, not just an audiobook narration. I do find that in the beginning, I was a little bit turned off, just a little bit, because as a person who's very familiar with that community, I get kind of burnt out on people telling me their coming out stories and they're realizing they were gay stories. But I stuck with it, and I have to say that I realized that was a really good decision, because the book is actually told in phases. It's predominantly linear, but it does go back and forth, where we'll get to a point in the story where he says, hold on, let's pause, let me go back and explain this. For example, he does cover Ariana Grande, not extensively, but enough to where you feel like she was properly integrated into this story. So he'll tell a story about, say, when he was on Broadway, which is all about him being on Broadway, but he'll have to pause for a moment and go back and refer to the relationship he had with his sister, because at that point, she was also on Broadway. She was starting out her career as an actor at that point. She hadn't yet been on Nickelodeon yet. So he will sometimes go back, but it's not done in a confusing way. It's very fluid. It makes sense for him to, I guess, essentially give a flashback when he gives that flashback. Now, speaking of Ariana Grande, she is not a gimmick. She is not a promotional tool. She becomes his sister in this book. And in this memoir, we see her as he sees her, his sister, someone he loves, someone who he will fiercely defend. We get to understand the love that they have for each other, how it developed, how at times it may have struggled due to, one or the other's career, how they help each other, and how they continue to stay strong today. This is definitely the right time to release this book. I probably would have released it a little earlier in June, to be honest, but it's still being released this June. It's perfect not only because of the obvious, Pride Month, but more specifically, if you're a parent of a child that is gay, specifically male and gay, this really helps you to understand what that gay child may be feeling when it comes to your response, because even the most supportive parent can have a misstep. In your attempt to protect your child and keep your child safe, you can accidentally send the message that you're ashamed of them. So there is a chapter of where Frankie talks about where he finally comes out. And I have to say that it was very enlightening how he could have so much support, and how that support could feel so much like shame, embarrassment, disapproval, and how that deeply affected him. So if you're a parent of someone who's gay, this will definitely help give you perspective on the right way to go about things. I also recommend this to anybody who's still in a closet, anyone who's afraid to come out, anyone who's struggling with invisibility. It gives you some pros and cons of that visibility. It gives you the pros and cons of coming out and choosing to be who you are, and helps you realize that no matter what decision you make, what you need more than anything is support. And lastly, I recommend this book to anyone who isn't gay, who just is having difficulty being accepted for who you are, whether you're a nerd, a geek, a theater person, a makeup fan, a girl's girl who has everything in pink. You should be who you are no matter what, because it's all about the life that you're leading and what makes you feel whole, what makes you feel at peace with yourself. Because gay or not, one of the biggest problems that Frankie had was accepting himself for who he was and dealing with other people choosing to accept it or trying to shrink him and silence him and tone down his colors. Something that literally happened to him when he was on a television show. Now, when it comes to the rating, I want to be very clear and very detailed. I'm giving this audiobook 4 stars. This rating does not apply to the hard copy of the book. It's only for the audiobook. Now, as I've said before, I'm not a fan of audiobooks. The reason I'm not a fan of audiobooks is I have autism and misophonia. So I need my sounds to be predictable, so to speak, and I can easily be irritated by sound. If you do not have those issues, this is going to be a 5-star audiobook for you, or at least a 4.5. One of the biggest turnoffs for me was the singing and was the outbursts. Initially, I loved it. It was loud, it was colorful, it was exciting, it held my attention, but after a while, it was jarring, and it was, I don't know how else to describe it, but if you have ADHD, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you have misophonia, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. So that's a flexible 4-star rating. I have to rate it based on my experience, not on what I think you will experience. But again, as a person who struggles with, people singing really loudly in my ear and other sounds particularly, the constant bursts of exclamations like "yay!" It's funny. It's perfect, but I could only handle so much of it. It was a little much for me, specifically for me. But as for other people, it may not actually be something that turns you off. Now, this next reason that I docked it a star is actually a bit hypocritical. I felt that he was long-winded. There were some chapters where, for example, when he was giving his tribute to Ariana, it was beautiful, it was perfect, but after a while I was like, okay, I get it. When we get towards the end of the audiobook and he's talking about his life, the good side, the part that you really want to know about is that everything turned out okay for him. It began to drag, and I listened all the way through to the epilogue. It dragged and dragged and dragged. I was like, we get it. Let's wrap this up. But at the same time, it's that attention to detail. It's the time he took to tell that story that made it so moving. It actually moved me to tears at times, made me crack up laughing at other times, made me angry at other times, made my jaw drop because there was a little bit of addition going on. But especially when it comes to the chapters on addiction. And then there were some chapters where the addiction was kind of a piece of that chapter, but not the focus. It was to the point where, as a person who does not struggle with addiction, I fully understand addiction now. His way of describing it was cinematic, it was honest, and it was very, very detailed. So I appreciated him taking his time on those chapters, on the moments that meant the most to him, whether they were good or bad. But there were times, like I said before, where I needed him to just wrap it up. And the last little ick I had about it is this phrase that you'll hear him use quite frequently. I'm not sure, again, if it'll be in the hard copy of the book, but he said his powers of hypnosis, that he's very charming. And all I kept hearing was, "You're a manipulative liar." I'm sorry, no shade, but yeah, he talks about how, at one point he got a little kid at school in trouble. The guy was an asshole. He deserved it. But essentially what he did was manipulate the situation with white man tears. So imagine how that felt for me. There were other instances where he talked about, manipulating people into believing he wasn't using, manipulating people into believing that, he could handle a relationship with that person, manipulating people into giving him money, manipulating people into feeling sorry for him. And then he would praise his mother and his sister for having those magical powers of persuasion. But all I kept hearing was gaslighting, manipulation, just dishonesty. But he will call it powers of hypnosis, powers of charm. And I'm like, that's a funny way to say that you're a liar and that you manipulate people. And that was a big turnoff of not just for the book, but on him as a person. And it did make me question Ariana Grande a little bit more, especially when you consider the blind items and all of the negative press about her that trickles around there. When you hear how proud he is that he's able to manipulate people and how proud he is that his mother and his sister also have that power of, shall we say, persuasion. It makes a lot of the gossip about Ariana make a lot more sense. And I don't think he meant to do that, but he did it nonetheless. All in all, this was a fantastic read, listen, fantastic audiobook. It's so good that I plan to purchase a hard copy of the book as something commemorative. If I could get it autographed, I would, and keep it on my shelf. He's just absolutely wonderful to listen to, especially for a girly who, like I said, has a hard time with audiobooks because of, my ADHD. Let me know what your favorite audiobook is. Let me know if you plan to listen to or read Frankie Grande's book, and let me know what you think of it once it comes out. Now, according to my notes, this comes out June 23rd, so make sure you pre-order your copy. I did see it available for pre-order on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, so make sure you go ahead and get your copy ahead of time. But for me, the audiobook was the best way to go. Once again, I'm author R.L. Raintree. This has been Reels and Reads, and thank you so much for watching.